Greetings everyone, welcome to another round of MTGA Tasting Notes. Today we get to dive into one of the biggest, baddest wines that we make from one of the biggest, baddest vintages that have crossed our path in recent years. This is our 2022 Grand Cask Cabernet Sauvignon, the 100% Cabernet Sauvignon that we make under the Grand Cask program, or in our Grand Cask program, that we started making all the way back in 2020. So this is the third release of this wine that we've been able to produce as we've gotten our Cabernet program up and running over the last few years. Now, if you haven't checked out some of the other videos and tasting notes on this wine, let me give you a little introduction to it, but please go back and check out some of those notes on the 2020 and 2021 as well. This is very similar to our single barrel program. For those that are familiar with that, with our Merlot, Cab Franc, and Pinot Noir that we've done in the past. Although with the Grand Cask, it tends to be a combination of different barrels coming together to make that one single barrel. The reason for that is because we're trying to really add just a bunch of layers and a ton of complexity in this wine and bring it to the level that it needs to be in order to be called the Grand Cask. So what we'll do with this is I have a couple different cooperages that I'm just a huge fan of. This Cabernet Sauvignon will be aged in 100% new oak, typically for about 30 months, maybe up to a full 3 years, just in barrel alone. After that time, we'll put it into bottle and it'll age for at least another 6 months once it finally starts to kind of soften up. Usually maybe closer to maybe about like 8 months or so when it's all said and done. And it's one of those wines that, this is my new favorite way to describe it. Someone mentioned this kind of descriptor to me and I've gone whole hog into using it because it makes the most sense. With wines like this that are this intense and can be a little bit tight, what we want to do is unwind that tension. That's something that from the new barrels that we're utilizing for aging this wine, it's also just for the fruit characteristics and everything else. Everything in these wines can be so wound up that we have these tight wines that need a bunch of decanting, or you need to age them for years and years to finally let them settle down and enjoy them to their fullest. I believe that after about this 3 to upwards of 4 year mark, that's when this wine really starts to show its true colors. As we go from a 2022 vintage and we're looking, 2026 in the mouth right now, it's something that it just takes that time. And as you're tasting this in barrel, you feel it, like the wine is just tight. It's not as expressive as you want it to be, and you need to allow for that to happen. So once it's bottled up, and this was bottled up actually in February of this year. So this would have been, in bottle now for almost 10 months, all said and done. It's finally starting to unwind. We're starting to notice, oh, hey, these flavors and characteristics are starting to really show themselves, and we're very happy with where it is right now. Now, I mentioned it's the biggest and one of the biggest, best wines that we make, and that's because it is 100% Cabernet, and we use all new oak barrels and a couple different oak barrels on this. But it's also from the 2022 vintage, which if you've seen any of our other tasting note videos on the 22 vintage, you know that there was a pretty intense heat spike that really hit us hard right as harvest was ramping up. What I'm very thankful for is that, one, there are some wines of ours that are going to be a little higher octane from this vintage. This is not one of them per se. They're also, even though they might be a little higher octane, there's still some great balance to them. Something that I was very pleasantly surprised, as much as we tried to mitigate that heat by watering a whole lot, by not removing any leaves on the vines, by being really choosy when we were hand sorting to avoid raisins and things of that nature. We really felt as though 22 was going to be a tougher vintage. And frankly, the way the wines are tasting, I'm incredibly impressed by what Napa in general has done to kind of work through that heat wave and allow for some of these wines to really shine. And I think our Grand Cask is no exception. Surprisingly enough, I would say, for those of you that are curious about like alcohol contents and things, and typically in those hot vintages with more sugar content, you see as a result higher alcohols as those fermentation processes go on. This is 14.53%, which is maybe a little higher than our average, I would say, when it comes to our big reds, but certainly not outside of the realm of possibilities. But the best thing about wines from ripe vintages is it's fairly easy to tell if they went a little bit too heavy-handed, and that's because you can feel that little bit of like burning sensation. The alcohol is a little bit hot, we like to say. So when you're dealing with these warm vintages, that's something you try and pay attention to, and that's something that you try to avoid. And that's why, for blending purposes and using a couple different new barrels for this wine, that's why we blend, even when it's 100% varietal. Because if you have a handful of barrels of any variety, you might only cherry pick the right proportions of each and not use all of them to make sure that your wine is as balanced as possible. Balance is something us winemakers love to toss around as an adjective, and it's something that all of us kind of have a slightly different definition of, but basically it means that there's not going to be any of these characteristics fighting for your attention. The oak, the fruit, the tannin, the acidity, the alcohol, everything that makes up these wines is in harmony with one another, and not trying to push one out to fight for supremacy. It's not Highlander. There needs to be more than one. You know what I mean? So on the nose with this, and this is something that I'm very thankful for, especially using 100% new oak, is that there's a little bit of that toastiness there, but you have this nice like blackberry, black cherry, fig, like fresh fig kind of characteristic going on there. There's certainly a little bit of those darker characteristics too, but it doesn't get too jammy, which I really, really love. You notice a lot of those kind of baking spices in there, a little bit of like your nutmeg, your allspice, and actually a lot of cinnamon in that. And there's just kind of like, every time you go back, you swirl it and go back for another smell, you're like, oh, there's something else I'm noticing, which is always the goal with these wines, especially of this quality, is we want you to keep coming back for more and for it to be even more interesting when you take the next sip or the next smell. And true to form, it's a big boy. It's almost like fresh blueberries when you taste it. You're like, oh, like there's this really bright blue fruit kind of thing going on there, but man, you feel this wine. It is chewy. And I think that's going to be very true of the 2022 vintage in general, is that these wines have a lot of presence. They let you know they're there and that you're sipping on them, because there is just this really intense kind of nature to it. It's been a little while since I've tasted this wine, so it's fun to go back and check it out, because I'm like, oh shit, it's a big boy. It really is. And what's nice about all the aromas that I was talking about, they carry over to the palate really, really well. I will say, this is a wine still, even after the amount of aging that we've done on it, it is something that will benefit from more time as well. So there's no need to be in a hurry, but if you have a few bottles of this, crack it open, see what it tastes like right now, and then if it still feels a little wound up like we were talking about, this is going to be one of those wines that you're going to be able to age for a long time. I always tell folks, since we still see some of our Merlots from the early 2010s, even some of our white wines going back to the mid 2010s, tasting great. You don't have to be in a hurry to drink our wines. Feel free to hang on to them, kind of collect them. It's, it can be that game of Pokemon for you. Collect them all and see which ones that you love, which ones that you like, and which ones that you need more of. I'm very thankful for this Grand Cask program. It's really allowed me to push some of the boundaries of what I've done historically as a winemaker, play with some new styles, some new aging techniques, new barrels, and really see how far we can kind of push our winemaking and the quality and complexity of some of the things that we get to do. This 2022 Grand Cask Cab is just no slouch. It'll keep you coming back for more, absolutely. Hopefully you'll have a chance to check this wine out. If you'd like more information on the Grand Cask, you can head to our website, mtgawines.com. Scroll to the very bottom of the homepage there, and you'll see the Grand Cask logo. You can click on that. It'll take you to a separate page that'll tell you everything you need to know about each release of our Grand Cask Cabernet, as well as our new Grand Cask white wine that we started producing from the 2023 vintage. Take care. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll see you next time for some MTGA tasting notes. Cheers.